A research report published in the Development Southern Africa Journal has revealed that South Africa's 8 metros, that's Cape Town, Tshwane, Johannesburg, Buffalo City, Nelson Mandela Bay, Ekurhuleni, Mangaung, as well as eThekwini, have seen a lackluster employment trajectory over the last decade. Now, joining us to discuss the data from this report is Professor Ivan Turok. He's South African National Research Foundation Chair for Economics. Good evening, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Now, you actually co-authored this report titled Striking Disparities in Employment Across South Africa. Just talk us through the findings from the better performing to the worst performing metros in this area of employment.
Yes, just as a brief way of background, this report for the first time captures hard information on what's happened to jobs throughout the country. We focus on employment, we focus on the big metros because these are the key engines of the national economy. And what it shows is that across the board, the performance has been pretty poor. One metro has declined. Nelson Mandela Bay has lost 5% of its jobs over the last decade. At the other extreme, Cape Town has increased its employment by about 20%. That's around 2% per annum, which is reasonable, but it's not spectacular. It keeps pace with the population growth in the city, so unemployment hasn't really come down.
I want us at some point to talk about the comparison between the booming Cape Town and what we're seeing in Johannesburg, because it seems to be quite the debate. But you've touched on the background of this research. I want us to also then talk about the source of the evidence for the report. Where does it come from? Because many, when research isn't too close to their perception or long-held views, they tend to question the source for its credibility. So let's start with just that when we're talking about the background. Talk to us about the source of this evidence.
Yeah. That's a key motivation for the research, to get some hard data and to move away from guesswork.
Yeah.
This is tax data. It's the best source of information because all formal employment pays tax. So we have access through various protocols, SARS tax data, to compile a definitive picture of jobs in the country.
All right. And then we go to perhaps the more consistent source of employment. What has the data indicated across the metros?
The data indicates that the Gauteng metros have not been doing well at all. It confirms our general impression that Joburg in particular is struggling because of various political and infrastructure problems in the city. This data confirms that Joburg hasn't recovered from COVID and that indeed it is really struggling to attract investment and to create more jobs.
So it means it settles that debate for those that had been of the view that perhaps it's just some who favor a Cape Town to say it's more booming, and Johannesburg of late has seen a decline in the number of jobs that they can actually create. You're saying that in fact the data indicates just that there has been some significant decline there.
Yes, it confirms the widening gap between Cape Town and Joburg, but it puts cautionary remarks about that. We mustn't sensationalize Johannesburg's decline. It's static rather than collapsing, and we mustn't exaggerate Cape Town's performance. It's not spectacular. It's modest, the growth in employment in Cape Town.
And then how much of an impact has COVID had on these cities' ability or inability to create employment? Because in many aspects of life now, we still use the pre- and post-COVID era as markers.
COVID was a massive shock, and I think we still haven't fully appreciated how significant it was. 6 of the 8 metros have not even recovered to where they were before COVID. Only 2 of them are back to that position beforehand. So it really was a profound shock to our national and city economies. Tshwane and Cape Town are the 2 that have recovered.
Professor, I want to take you back to my earlier question around what the report has indicated to be the most consistent source of employment growth across the metros. What have we found? Which industries, or at least where you're seeing the employment growth?
We make a critical distinction between tradable industries and non-tradables. The tradables are export-type industries, manufacturing and tradable services like professional services, engineering, science, tourism, and we show that actually most of the growth is in non-tradable services. These are local circulating dependent industries like retail, hairdressing, retail banking and so on. We're moving in the wrong direction on these industries. We need to be strengthening the export base of our cities and not simply circulating more and more resources through shopping and hairdressing and consumer services. So that's an important distinction. More government, more economic policy focus on the tradables and less on the consumer services.
More focus on the tradables. Professor, thank you very much for your insights this evening. That is Professor Ivan Turok. He is South African and National Research Foundation Chair for Economics there. As we've seen, the debate has been settled, at least on Cape Town and Johannesburg. But as he stated, it cannot be exaggerated. There has not necessarily been a decline in Johannesburg, but rather that it's been stagnant.